we're going to talk a little bit now about engagement. So on an event that we ran recently, we talked about something called Meet the Buyer. So there are lots of different ways for organisations to both find opportunities, but also to understand them through building relationships and getting to know your customer or potential customer. And there is a process called Meet the Buyer. We, at a recent event, ran a poll. There were hundreds of organisations that took part in it, and 85% of people that we talked to on that particular session said that they'd never attended a Meet the Buyer event. So Ian's just going to tell us a little bit about the Meet the Buyer events that Bradford has typically run, how many businesses might attend, what the purpose of those Meet the Buyer events are, and if COVID has changed that as an engagement method at all, or how it might change in the future.
Thanks, Jill. So I think when I think traditionally about Meet the Buyer events, opportunities for suppliers and generally procurement staff to network, it's normally at a large conference centre or a race course or something like that, and there's a significant cost to local authorities to putting those events on. And really, when I think about the main messages that we were giving out at those types of events, it was very much come for a chat and register on the e-procurement system, and there wasn't a great deal of depth other than that we used to give out at those types of events. And I think over the past, maybe the build up in the 18 months before the pandemic, I think that type of approach changed and evolved, and engagement became very much more project or market specific. So suppliers of a particular large project or a large service that the council or the contracting authority was about to procure were targeted, and this was normally prior to a procurement process. And I think what COVID and the pandemic has shown is that we can now do that type of process remotely, and actually we can engage with our potential suppliers on the back of an advert on Contracts Finder or our own portal, and actually bring everybody together and communicate like a webinar just like this. And actually that's made it much more efficient for us, for the suppliers as well. You'd have to take time out of your day to travel somewhere to talk to someone. And I think personally, my view is that events like this, you lose the good bits of the traditional type of Meet the Buyer. And where I think this will evolve in future, particularly for Bradford, is some sort of hybrid. I think we will continue to engage on project specific stuff through virtual Teams seminars. But I think what we'll end up doing is probably overlaying a lot of our pipeline work, what's coming up, with partners probably based within the district. So if you think about any given district, you've normally got some sort of NHS, hospital, colleges, universities, councils, who are all driven by the same rules and essentially all govern by what will be the change of rules as well, coming up in terms of the change of procurement legislation. And I think those are the things that we're going to see, place-based Meet the Buyer events where you can come and meet the key stakeholders, not just the procurement staff from all the what you would call the anchor institutes within a particular district. And I think for me, that's certainly the ambition in Bradford, and I've seen some stuff fairly recently at other places. I think Middlesbrough held one fairly recently, and that's going to be where sort of Meet the Buyer events go, in my opinion.
Perfect, thank you. I think in terms of engagement, it can often be difficult for small businesses because there are so many different ways. And ultimately, engagement and securing work are two parts of a whole equation. And ultimately, we will end up in almost guaranteed that the opportunity and the securing of that will come through a portal. And again, in a poll that we did recently, 60% of organisations that we talked to weren't registered on a procurement portal. And it's really hard, and I'll be brutally honest, it's really hard to say to a small business, register on all of them, because there are so many. On a previous slide, we just showed actually a few of the main ones, but there are lots of them. And it's one of the reasons why Contracts Finder could be helpful, because you'll be able to see across all of those portals in Contracts Finder and find a tender service. But ultimately, those portals are currently the mechanism of being able to access the public sector in the main. Certainly there will be some processes that sit out of it. And so, like it or not, actually the portal is a route that small businesses will need to go through. But again, you don't need to be registered on every single portal to be able to access the opportunities that you want. But it's worth investing some time in learning. And these are questions that you can ask at things like Meet the Buyer. And you will get tabled at Meet the Buyer in a really positive way, what the portal is, how to use it, and how you can get some more help and support. Each of the portals do have help functions in there. There's tutorial videos. There is actually lots of support in any of the portals. They're there to try and help you get through it. But one of the things that I'm just going to flip to voice technology actually, and what might come up in the future, and it really is on the mind of both Go for Growth and the public sector organisations that we're working with, is actually what are the things that we can do to make accessing the public sector that bit easier. So both from a finding an opportunity perspective and understanding it, and then actually going forth and being able to submit, whether it's a grant application or a tender or a quote or whatever that is. And I think one of the acknowledgements is that small businesses are typically just super busy. Time is a really precious commodity in smaller organisations, and it is for all of us. You know, Ian works for a big organisation, and time is not in abundance for any of us. But I think in smaller organisations, likely you are multifaceted. So you are the salesperson, the procurement person, your HR, your finance, your IT. You can be a lot of different things. And so one of the things that I think we're seeing a bit more of is technology trying to make the process of interacting with public sector procurement that bit more interactive and that bit easier. And so one of the things we were exploring with a set of organisations was actually using voice-powered search functionality. How helpful would that be? And in effect, it almost gives you an ability to multitask for a time. But so if we're getting more and more used to using Alexa and Google and other search engines using the voice technology, would you be saying, right, hi Alexa, tell me what scaffolding opportunities there are in Bradford or Yorkshire and the Humber up to a value of 500,000? And that would be spoken back to you. So you were listening to that opportunity as opposed to seeing it on your technology. And then actually you might ask the voice technology to read that opportunity out to you, and maybe the technology would go as far as to actually be a more interactive bid environment where the technology actually goes through the questions. So tell me about how you manage health and safety on site as a scaffolding organisation. You have 2 minutes to talk us through it. What's your level of public liability insurance, etc., so that you speak the bid as opposed to the traditional method of going through a portal, downloading the documents, typing, and then re-uploading the documents. Now, all of that would need to be done so that the sanctity of the process is protected still, that the infrastructure, governance and compliance is there, and that the process itself doesn't create any conflict from a transparency, a visibility and a fairness perspective. But I think there are potentially some advancements in technology that will come along that will lighten the burden for, especially for smaller organisations and VCSEs, when actually interacting with that bid. And there is a long-term ask from us to anybody who is interacting with this webinar at any point. If you have ideas about things that would make that process easier or more accessible, whether that's from a technology perspective or not, please do feel free to let us know. And I think social media, social media is one of those functionalities that we are all super familiar with, both for the good and the bad of social media. But again, it's interesting to think about how social media plays its role in procurement, and potentially at the moment, not a huge amount, but 64% of people that we talked to recently said they would welcome more interaction on a social media basis from public sector buyers in terms of advertising opportunities. And so I'm just going to invite Ian to talk us through a little bit more about the engagement methods that Bradford uses and colleagues that he might know about in other authorities around social media, whether there are plans to advertise opportunities on social media in the future, how you engage now and get to know the market, and how you currently advertise your opportunities in Bradford.
Thanks, Jill. So in terms of advertising current opportunities, we are fairly traditional still. It's our own e-procurement portal, contracts finder, find a tender. What we do have in Bradford is good communication channels from the commissioners in various sectors into something like a care sector and actually all the VCSE sector. And actually we have a lot to tell them on a regular basis, and we weave the procurement messages, the opportunities into those almost email distribution lists or bulletins. Where we want to improve this is we do want to use social media, and I'm really interested in what is the right platform, or is it all the platforms to advertise what our opportunities are? So is it Facebook, is it Twitter, is it LinkedIn? My personal view is that LinkedIn would be the starting point, because I think local authorities particular use Facebook, for example, for community messages and messages to citizens and residents. So that's where we want to develop our opportunities, and a really smooth process for us to advertise, but then for suppliers to see the opportunity and then be directed to the right place. Because I think what we can't get away from is, I'm not sure you'll ever be able to bid for a contract on LinkedIn. So actually it becomes another method of comments against a particular post for us to monitor. So what we're actually looking for is the most efficient way to spread the message without actually creating a burden either for ourselves from a resource perspective, or actually the suppliers respond to a comment and actually just almost get left without knowing the right information, because that's a risk for us. In terms of more broader accessibility, the one thing that we're always trying to do is improve our documents. I think one of the things that gets fed back to me a lot is that the word document, which is what it is at the minute and what it will be for most organisations, is really hard to understand, is very, very big, takes too long, is not accessible on things like iPads. The Microsoft sort of functionality kind of predetermines that everybody has a laptop. That's not necessarily the case now, so we need to think about online evaluation. Can it be done through a browser? And those are the challenges for us as we kind of move forward, thinking about accessibility. I think in terms of broader engagement, we're really pleased to be working with Go for Growth and events like these, and creating that sort of enduring content that suppliers can dip in as and when suits them. And it's really important that we are part of this.
I couldn't agree more. I guess there is a driver to emulate in the public procurement space how our lives use technology and access other information and data sources going forward. So it was interesting actually, LinkedIn and Facebook are almost equal when businesses talk to Go for Growth about the platform that they would like to see used for business communications or procurement communications. 79% LinkedIn, 74% Facebook, and 53% Twitter. So typically Facebook doesn't necessarily always come up as the first place you would think about for business communications, but perhaps it is a growth area. It was certainly something we'll be exploring more on the next session with Kevin Tracy from North Yorkshire's social media. Thank you for that, Ian.